quality corporate training meets powerful AI. Docebo is the world's first generative AI learning platform. You can customize the learning experience and create content in seconds. Learn more at docebo.com.
There's an elephant on America's political scene today. It's not the stylized red and blue of the great old Republican Party, although it does have to do with both the USA and the Republicans. Instead, it's a scribble on a 2012 graph by Serbian economist Branko Milanovic. Milanovic is the author of important studies such as global inequality, and about 12 years ago, he traced the ups and downs of the economy on a graph that looks shockingly like the outline of an elephant. His goal was to prove the progression of inequality between 1988 and 2008, meaning between the fall of the Soviet bloc and the financial crisis of the late aughts. On the x-axis, we see the percentiles of global income distribution. On the y-axis, the income growth rate from the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st. The lowest point of the x-axis is where the elephant's trunk appears, and this is precisely where the American and European middle classes take a tumble. Between 1988 and 2008, the Western middle class gets gobbled up right here. The working class, on the other hand, was already beaten down by the liberal economics of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan back in the 80s. At the tip of the rising elephant trunk, however, we see the exact opposite, the boom of global elites. Right at the top of the pyramid, looking down, is the famous establishment, the wealthiest 1% of the 1% on the planet. The Democratic Party lost the election against Donald Trump in 2016 at a specific point of Milanovic's graph. Right at the base of the trunk, this part of the diagram has its own name, and it's one that recalls a specific area on the maps of the USA. It's called the Rust Belt. I am Guido Brera, and you're listening to Black Box, The Hidden Side of Finance, a podcast by Cora Media, sponsored by Docebo. In 2016, the Rust Belt is central for analysts and commentators as they try to understand how Trump could win the election. The Rust Belt is the Democrats' personal Little Big Horn, the home of overlooked factory workers and the impoverished middle class. That's precisely where the presidential elections were to take place, in the Northeast, the forgotten factory belt. The land of coal and steel. This is where factories used to churn out product and workers used to make their living. Today, it's a strip of ruined houses and rusting cars, of clinics dealing in opioids and filthy diners, closed businesses and widespread poverty. The Rust Belt, a social experiment in paranoia and fear where heroin and psychiatric drugs are massively consumed. The Rust Belt, left behind by modernity, sacrificed on the altar of globalization, unaware of the Ubers, Deliveroos, and Airbnbs that the rest of the world enjoys, cut out of the rhetoric of algorithms and the sharing economy. The Rust Belt, the land that time forgot. In 2016, Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party represented the eternal status quo, the depressing continuation of nothing, the empty promise of better times. Trump, on the other hand, was a fast-forward button. He was a catalyzer, the trigger of hope for all the hopeless men and women that wanted to call the Democrats' bluff. Like the French philosopher Alain Badiou said, when you have Trump, you can't want Clinton. And so from the Rust Belt, from the base of the elephant trunk of Milanovic, comes all the hatred of those who were left behind, who were crushed by globalization, by automation, by digital capitalism, by our new technological world. Much has changed since then. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic makes for a perfect breaking point. It clearly defines the before and after. Joe Biden wins the elections that same year, and he'll become the 46th president of the United States. he'll face the crisis directly and inspire the great turnaround of the post-pandemic phase. The Democrats have attempted to transform a groundbreaking catastrophe into an opportunity. They poured trillions of dollars into strategic sectors of national production and invested in infrastructure. They supported large-scale reshoring and supported the relocation on American soil of companies for electronic and electric components, as well as computers. Many of his measures saw the resurgence of state-oriented industrial policies. For example, the CHIPS and Science Act destined $52 billion for advanced and standard chip production in order to cut down on the supply chain for microprocessors. This was a necessary measure, especially in view of the rising demand in many American industrial fields, from the automotive to the medical sector. With the Inflation Reduction Act, he injected money to stimulate investing in renewable energy and fossil fuels. The Democratic policies seem to have brought about excellent results. And from the point of view of markets, the USA is definitely the best of all possible worlds, its economy growing consistently over the last few years. Unemployment is stable as well, under 4%. 2023 registered great highs on the stock exchange. Standard & Poor's closed the year with a plus 24%, the Nasdaq with plus 54%. In short, the best results of the century. It would seem that Milanovich's graph is outdated. Maybe something changed for the jaded middle class that voted for Trump back in 2016. We're talking about social classes with average or average-high incomes from $50,000 up. These are people that were facing the real danger of losing wealth, harboring the awareness that they had lost a central position in American society. It would seem that the Democrats have all but won the next presidential run. But that's not the case at all. Quite the opposite. There's real fear for the return of the Donald in the White House. Recent polls show that Trump's popularity is even rising in those essential groups that voted for Biden back in 2020, such as Hispanics and younger voters. Bernie Sanders sounded the alarm when, during an interview for The Guardian, he pled the Democratic president to listen to the working class's fears. Sanders claims that the White House needs to move more aggressively on health care, on housing, on tax reform, and on the high cost of prescription medication. Otherwise, the Democrats may likely lose. According to detractors, the president is returning to his comfort zone at the middle of the political scene. Biden is moving too timidly when it comes to essential issues such as student loans and climate change, for example. The Inflation Reduction Act is undoubtedly the greatest ecological investment in history, but at the same time, Biden has also approved more gas and oil permits on federal land than even Donald Trump. Just like Alan Badiou said, if you have Trump, you can't want Clinton. Perhaps the words of the French philosopher ring just as true for these elections. As if to say, now that Trump is back, you can't want Biden. Under the veneer of the best of all possible worlds, as seen from the perspective of markets, there's another America. It's an America that is buckling under high inflation and can't afford to make up for it by investing in stocks. This side of America is cut out of the rising bull market. These are the Americans who can't take advantage of the stock exchange to compensate the increase in prices. In this America last week, the Consumer Sentiment Index, which measures consumers' perception of the economy, measured the lowest level since March 2020. In this America, mortgages are stuck at their highest levels in the last 20 years, while the price of housing goes up and the average citizen's home affordability is crashing down. This is the America where more citizens are defaulting on their mortgages than ever, more than double since January 2023. These are the Americans with the highest debt ever, where the interest payments per family are the most consistent ever. They say that elephants never forget a thing, so we should look back at the proboscis of Branko Milanovich's pachyderm. the middle class is still struggling hard. Sure, perhaps it's not as angry as before, but it's certainly afraid. Very afraid. This is the America that suffers. As of yet, it still doesn't have a nice icon for the pundits to explore, such as the Rust Belt in 2016, but it can still make a difference. This is an America without a dream, but it may well drag the world down into a nightmare. Black Box is a Cora News podcast, produced by Cora Media and sponsored by Docebo. Written by Guido Brera with I Diavoli. Editorial supervision by Francesca Milano. Intro and sound design by Luca Micheli. Editing and post-production by Luca Micheli and Mattia Liciotti. Production organization by Alex Peverengo.